Hi, welcome to the Signature Leadership Show. I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, the host. Signature Leadership is about helping world-class leaders uncover their authentic selves so that we can uncover our authentic selves. And what I mean by authentic is those relatable, vulnerable places in our lives that don't always produce the outcomes we want at first, but ultimately help us get to an interesting place and achieve what we want to achieve. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, a former colleague, Dr. Nick Maes. Nick has a PhD in the classics. He is a author of several books, both young adult and some upcoming nonfiction books. He's also a professor. And as a place where we'll start, he's recently retired. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much. Hi there.
Nick, tell me about retirement. It's relatively new for you. What does it mean to retire for you?
I think many people have heard this before. It's really the step to the next path that one wants to take. I think if people think of retirement as essentially sitting down and doing nothing, that is to say, for the first time in your life, you don't have to do anything, I think it's going to be a disastrous retirement. Life is very precious. And it just so happens I'm 62 and I've done stuff so far that I've been very happy to do, teaching high school, teaching in the university. But I've always wanted to write full time. And I thought that I would stop at the age of 62 with my other activities. And I would give writing a full shot, both fiction and nonfiction, just to see what would happen. I think I can swing it financially. And it seems to be the best way I can make use of the rest of my time, however long that time might be.
So you've written, as long as I've known you, over a decade and a half, you found a way to combine your full-time job as a professor, as a teacher, with writing books. Published, some self-published. What's the plan moving forward where this is something you can do full-time?
I think it really is a question of time. Writing, for me at least, is very, very time consuming. And I've never suffered from a shortage of ideas that I want to explore. It's just that in order to explore an idea in depth, and in the case of nonfiction, that would mean reading extensively on that subject, there simply isn't enough time in the day. And therefore, everything has always been done in a hurry. And some of the results I'm very happy with, but others I'm not 100% happy with. And there's always been this starting and stopping to the day because there have always been other responsibilities that I've had to look into. So the possibility of just doing this, immersing myself, is really what I find very intriguing. I'm not sure exactly where it will take me, but I think it will be to a very good place.
What's a problem that you're dealing with right now that you're looking to solve when it comes to your writing?
Well, there are two components to that, and they're related. On the one hand, I just love the process itself. I love where it takes me. I love rewriting text just because I want to get it right. But that's where the second problem comes in. What does it mean to get something right as far as writing goes? I mean, wouldn't it be enough just to write for me? And if you are going to get it right, you do have to write for an audience. But if you're writing for an audience, you are invariably looking at the possibility of actually having that audience examine your work, respond to that work, savor your work, or perhaps even hate it. And that means you really do have to look at publication. There is inevitably, even if you write for the best of reasons, if you push yourself as hard as possible, it is ultimately a social act. And therefore you have to communicate with other people. And that leads you to the very, very pragmatic difficulty of finding a publisher or an agent and getting it out there.
So it's finding a publisher is one of the problems that you are, or not maybe a problem, but a possibility you're looking forward to attracting.
Yes, absolutely.
And what have you done with your newest project, or what is your plan with your newest project to attract that publisher?
That's so far, I've been keeping my powder dry, but I think there are different ways you can go about it. You can just go through the front door, and that would essentially mean approaching an agent. Most publishing houses do not accept unsolicited submissions. So you can go to an agent, and of course, in selling yourself, you can talk about the publications that you've had in the past. And I have published a number of books. By Canadian standards, they've done okay, but I'm yesterday's man to some degree. So how do you actually persuade someone to actually read the first few pages that you've written? And it's a very mysterious process if you go through that front door, because you have no idea whether they've done anything, whether they've looked at your letter, your cover letter, in which within the space of 5 paragraphs you try to sell yourself, whether they've gone beyond that and read the first page of your manuscript, or whether, because they've had so many emails coming in, they've just pretty much deleted it but without looking at it, because it's just they're overwhelmed. So very often you do not hear back from such people. So this being the case, on the one hand, I think because it doesn't cost you anything except emotionally to go through the front door, you can continue with that approach. But I'm trying to think of other strategies. And that leads to the side door, the back door. And it could take the form of publishing on Substack once I'm really 100% confident about that inner audience I've been addressing. And I feel that it would appeal to an outer audience. I would be happy to perhaps publish some stuff on Substack just to see what happens. Or you can create some type of web presence for yourself. Although, as you can tell from my appearance, I'm not the most up-to-date of people. And that could take different forms as well. Do you approach people with your fiction? Well, you're trying to sell your fiction. So maybe you can approach people with something that you're already quite confident about. And that would be, in my case, various lesson plans that I've done, or offering criticisms of books, or things of that nature.
On that last point where you talked about potentially putting your lesson plans, you're a revered teacher, professor for decades, that to me is what I would call going through the side door. That is, you have a goal, which is to have a reputable publisher publish your nonfiction book. And those publishers are not calling unless someone has a history of New York Times bestselling books, or they have a specific skill set that is in demand globally. Like it could be a leader in AI in a Fortune 100 company. If you don't have those skill sets with nonfiction, it might be hard to get noticed right away. But what you said at the end there, that to me is what more nonfiction authors, speakers, people who want to transition, especially at the age of when they're retiring, could do, I think, more of. So if you want to publish that book, what's something you can do where you gain attention and you draw people toward you in your area of expertise? Because if people find you as a published curriculum creator and you write your bio and they like your work, they might be more curious to find out more about the books you write. Dostoevsky said something once, to paraphrase, which stood out to me. He said, "My dreams came true just in unexpected forms." So I got to the end goal, but in a way that wasn't expected. So what I'd like to push you to do as a friend, I think I can say this, is I want to see you moving more toward those side doors, because you're the most disciplined writer and one of the most disciplined creative people I know. But what are those side doors you could take? Like I thought what we're doing here in a podcast form, you're so eloquent as a speaker, often without notes, as we're going to try something in a minute to actually show people that based on my experiences. But what could you do if you're an aspiring speaker, writer, and you've just retired? You go through the side door. You don't only say, I'm going to be a speaker and speak on the biggest stages in the world, or I'm going to write a New York Times bestselling book. You can have those goals, but what is the way that you can get noticed? Because the more of an expert you're seen as in the public and on social media, the more of a chance you have to get noticed to do that thing that you really want to do when you're retiring. And I've not just seen this with Nick, I've seen this with other leaders who I'm privileged to be working with on a regular basis. There are many speakers who were former CEOs or aspiring speakers who were former CEOs or VPs. There's people who want to write nonfiction books who had lots of success in other areas of their life. So what is the back door, the side door that you can focus on equally, if not more, than the actual goal itself.
I guess I would just add too, I've met people who have not hooked up with a significant other, and they don't even know what the significant other would be like. But they're so in love with the idea of being in love that they make the mistake of ending up with someone who really isn't suited to them. And this is a long and involved way of saying that ultimately, I don't want to be a New York Times bestseller person. I mean, that isn't really the primary goal. The primary goal is to write the very best fiction and the very best nonfiction that I can,
Mhm.
and then have perhaps the success come about organically. Although, once again, I think everything that Jamie said is absolutely true. The success can only come about probably in something of a strategic fashion. But I don't want to be the used car salesman who is just selling anything to anyone. I want to know, I want confidence. I really want confidence in the product that I'm trying to give to other people. And I guess I'm just sort of hoping that if it is of a certain quality, eventually it does find its path with enough pushing and prodding. So
So,
that's,
so one step you alluded to was post your lesson plans online on one of these sites where teachers can post them
yes,
as a way of taking an immediate step.
yes,
I
yeah.
love that. This is a long journey to be a creator, to be a writer. And I've seen from a distance the challenges that you've had over that period of being a published author and also to continue to publish. What leader or story in history do you draw inspiration from when it comes to being resilient in the face of challenges in pursuit of goals?
I guess the orator Demosthenes. We don't speak of Demosthenes too often these days. This was a man who was born with a speech impediment. And he very much wanted to get ahead in Athenian politics, but you couldn't do that. It just wasn't possible unless you were able to speak well and fluently. And he spoke with, he would fill his mouth with pebbles and would, according to his ancient biography, and would try speaking with these pebbles in his mouth, and gradually the effort led to perfect elocution. And at the same time, we're told that he was a rather scrawny individual, according to his biographer. Once again, he actually would run up the hill, just run up these hills in the areas of Athens, speaking as loudly as he could so that he would just improve his wind. And it's just fascinating to think of someone overcoming these natural disabilities in an area where being perfect in that area was absolutely so crucial, and doing so with such fanaticism until really he did become an extraordinary spokesman on behalf of Athens for the wrong cause. It's true. I mean, in the end, he was pretty much pushed to one side. All of his political ambitions came to nothing. But still, I do admire the effort.
Yeah, yes. What's the worst advice you've received when it comes to writing? And maybe what's the best advice?
The best advice is a truism. The best advice is you just keep writing. I am a writer as passionate as any writer who has ever existed. I'm not saying I have the same talent. I'm not saying that people will be speaking of me 200 years from now in the way that they would of a Charles Dickens. But my commitment to writing is no less great than any writer living today. I'm unsparing of myself. I think I'm very honest with myself about the quality of what I do. I ceaselessly find ways of trying to improve it. And this just comes from that notion of write as often as you can. In fact, you can't write often enough. If you even allow 2 or 3 days to pass by, you lose a certain conditioning, and it does show in the quality of the work. I think the worst advice that I've ever really heard was give it up if you haven't met with a certain degree of success after a certain time. It's just not for you. I think that's false because it really predicates the purpose of writing with this on this notion that you're only really a great writer if you get published and you have mass adulation. And that's not whatever drew me to become a writer. I don't want people turning around saying, "Whoa, Nick Maes, there he goes down the street." I just really would like to know that some of these thoughts that I've had, and some of them have been shared with people in conversation, that they are of value, even though I might never get to know whether someone has chuckled over something I've written or has read it and been in one way or another inspired. I just find it tremendously moving. And at the same time, I just love the conversation that takes place in the middle of the time, where I imagine these different characters and situations and the dialogue that they would come up with. This idea that you're supposed to give it up after 3 years, 4 years, because you gave it your best shot and it didn't come to anything. I think that really, really was an indication of how little that person knew about what writing truly, truly means.
Yeah. So it's the journey, not just the destination.
Yeah, it has to be that. It has to be that. If I were opening up a company or a restaurant and it was absolutely necessary that I have customers coming in, then of course, after a couple of years, it's very good advice to close it up. But that's not what writing is. That's not what we humans are in so many of the things we do. And what's true of writing, I think, is true of so many different things: parenting, teaching, right, friendship. You keep at it because it's good in its own right, and you don't expect it necessarily to pay a huge dividend.
Last question, tying it back to your first year moving forward as someone who retired from where you were to where you're going. 12 months from now, what do you want to be celebrating when it comes to writing?
That 2 novels that I have in pretty good shape are now in a shape whereby I really feel they should be launched. And that's really very workable. Then I've got another one that is in decent shape, but I really want to. It's a very funky novel. I really want it to be in a position where, yes, it's actually taken flesh in my mind. And finally, I wish to get the template down for I really hope to get this nonfiction book that I'm working on now down in final form. I've tried several versions of it, and I think finally, I'm on the right track. So it's almost there. It really is almost there, and I think all of this is workable within the next 12 months.
Mm-hmm. Great. I look forward to reading them. Nick, I appreciate your insights into the writing process from an experienced writer who is at a really unique time in his life where he's moving from one stage of his life and beginning a new stage and being able to jump right into what his passion and what one of his great strengths is, which is writing.
I don't think anyone really retires unless we're very, very fragile. I think in the end, if we've played our cards right for a first significant part of our lives, and we've been responsible, and we've actually prepared a nest egg of sorts that would enable us to live comfortably from now until the end. The end comes near. I think it's incumbent on us to use that comfort and that nest egg to be the very best we can possibly be, because now we define life more on our own terms. It's not being defined by a prospective employer. It's not being defined by children any longer. Of course, I've got 3 children and they'll always be in my lives, but I'm not raising them any longer. Instead, you are really looking at the world and you're imposing your terms on it. And it would be disappointing if being in this extraordinary position, I was waiting for someone else to tell me where to go rather than telling myself what the best direction for me is. So it's not retirement, it's just, the new beginning, shall we say. Yes.
And on that note.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Jimmy. All the best.
You too.